The Lockerbie bombing was the worst attack on UK soil since the Second World War, and there's never been anything as bad as it since. The scale of the devastation was extraordinary.
في 21 من ديسمبر عام 1988 قرابة الساعة 7 مساء اختفت الرحلة 103 عن شاشات الرادار فجأة. كانت طائرة بان آم التي تحمل على متنها 259 راكبا قد انطلقت من مطار هيثرو في لندن عابرة المحيط الأطلسي باتجاه مطار جون اف كينيدي في نيويورك. وخلال دقائق معدودة سمع أهالي مدينة لوكوربي الاسكتلندية صوتا مدويا. وفي أجزاء من الثانية قتل جميع ركاب الطائرة بالإضافة إلى 11 شخصا من سكان لوكيربي، ليرتفع عدد ضحايا الانفجار إلى 270 قتيلا، ويتشكل تاريخ جديد لمدينة لوكيربي، ويمر أكثر من 30 عاما من الاتهامات والمحاكمات والإدانات بحثا عن العدالة.
Sitting with other journalists in a Lockerbie pub, trying to decide whether it was acceptable to talk about the passengers having been vaporized by the explosion.
Yes, people have to be punished. Mr. Gaddafi committed a heinous crime and deserved to be punished. Equally, he was terminally ill, he was going to die. He was not going to be a threat to anybody else.
Margaret Thatcher herself was saying that the Lockerbie bombing was not the work of Libya.
مباشرة أمريكا وجهت التهمة إلى إيران، ثم بعد ذلك وجهت التهمة إلى بعض المنظمات الفلسطينية المتشددة، وانتهى الأمر عند هذا الحد. لذلك كانت مفاجأة.
It was the PFLP, it was Iran, it was Libya, it was others who were all involved, and equally in the investigation after, the British were working with the Americans, were working with Mossad, were working with the Germans. This was a global situation. It just happened to destroy a small Scottish town.
Driving north from England and seeing what I took to be pockets of snow in the fields, and I thought that's strange, but on closer examination it wasn't snow, it was fragments of the fuselage of the PamM jet that had been destroyed.
Our cottage is about half a mile in that direction, so I can see the church and the point where it crashed from my bedroom window. The cockpit of the plane carried on up the valley and crashed in this field on our left, about 30 yards from the church. Inside that cockpit was the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, and still several passengers sat in their seats.
Houses were destroyed, people were killed. Other parts of the town were very badly damaged as well. And all around, particularly to the east of the town, for many, many miles, there was debris from the aircraft and there were dead bodies.
There was people hanging in trees and in the fields. Parts of the seats, they still sat in seats. Some parts of the seats landed with people still sat in the seats, and it was horrific. And the wreckage was split over hundreds of square miles. They had the army and the police out searching for months, collecting as much as they could.
it was not just the victims' relatives who suffered, but the whole community suffered. There was another thing that made it easier for us, I think. Speaking for myself, I know exactly where my daughter's body fell, and therefore I know that the grisly descriptions we had this morning were not of her body.
A lot of were Americans on the plane. They were also from all over the world. And there's another lady buried in that end from, I think she's South American. So, and an English young girl buried on that side of the, her father was a reverend in the Midlands, and she's buried in here. So there are people buried. There's a memorial, this hut there, that's a memorial, a small memorial. The large memorial, the proper memorial in Lockerbie itself.
When it was finally announced that the plane had been brought down by a bomb, and how they had put together the fragments of a suitcase. And in those days you didn't have mobile phones. So I remember walking the streets of Lockerbie trying to find a public telephone. I couldn't. I had to knock on the door of somebody's house to ask them if I could use a telephone to send my report back to the Guardian.
عام 1991 اتهمت الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وبريطانيا الضابطين الليبيين عبد الباسط المجراحي والأمين خليفة فحيمة بالتورط في تفجير الطائرة، وأصدر مجلس الأمن الدولي القرار رقم 748 الذي يطالب فيه ليبيا بتسليم المشتبه بهم. ونتيجة لرفض ليبيا تسليم المشتبه بهم، أوقفت الأمم المتحدة جميع روابط النقل الجوي مع ليبيا، وحظرت بيع الأسلحة والطائرات لها. كما وقع الرئيس كلينتون عام 1996 تشريعاً يفرض عقوبات اقتصادية قاسية على الشركات التي تقوم باستثمارات مستقبلية في مشاريع بترولية إيرانية وليبية، وطالب بفرض عقوبات نفطية عالمية على ليبيا.
العالم كله غير مقتنع من البداية بشرعية هذه القرارات، ومعروف أن أمريكا وبريطانيا فرضتا هذه القرارات على مجلس الأمن.
المتهمان هما محمد الأمين فحيمة وعبد الباسط المجرحي. حسب المعلومات التي اطلعت عليها عندما انتشر الخبر في الشرق الأوسط وفي صحيفة الحياة، هما ضابطان يتبعان المخابرات الليبية، يعملان في مكاتب الخطوط الجوية الليبية تقريبا في مالطا أو في السفارة الليبية، يرتبطان بالمؤسسات الليبية في مالطا. وحسب الأدلة التي اطلعنا عليها فيما بعد والتي استندت إليها المحكمة أن هناك متجر في مالطا ويبيع ملابس، وهذه الملابس وجدت في حقيبة شركة سويسرية قالت أنها تبيع مادة التفجير ستيمكس تقريبا اسمها، تبيعها إلى ليبيا، وأن عملاء ليبيون هم الذين يشترونها.
The original evidence that was uncovered seemed to suggest that the bombing was the work of Iran and some proxy terrorist groups that it hired. This included the fact that the bomb was apparently in a Toshiba radio cassette player, and the group, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, who were based in Syria and sponsored by Iran, were also making bombs designed to blow up aircraft in Toshiba radio cassette players.
أعتقد أن القضية من البداية لم تكن قضية جنائية بحتة، وإنما كانت السياسة في صلب هذه القضية. تم استبعاد إيران بشكل مؤقت.
Then the investigation shifted towards Libya, There was evidence from Libya, there was evidence of clothes from Libya that were packed around the bomb in the suitcase that contained the bomb. Then there was some evidence, eyewitness evidence from the shopkeeper who sold the clothes, who partially identified Abdul Basit al-Megrahi. And then there was some forensic evidence as well, which a fragment of circuit board which was supposedly from the bomb's timer, and that circuit board was traced to a timer which was supposedly sent to Libya. The more I looked at the case, the more it seemed to me that the official version that we were being told, that the bombing was committed by 2 Libyan alleged agents, was simply not true. The evidence against them, when you look at it in detail, all falls apart.
The West, and in particular the Scottish prosecutors, had started with a long list of people, including no doubt Colonel Gaddafi, Musa Kusa, al-Sanusi, and others who probably, I think almost certainly, were more complicit than certainly Mr. Fima, who was acquitted, or indeed al-Megrahi, who was convicted.
What we now know is that the eyewitness evidence that put Abdul Basit al-Megrahi in the shop buying those clothes was actually very faulty, because the shopkeeper identified a man who was much older and bigger than Mr. Megrahi. The forensic evidence is equally fragile because what we discovered after his conviction was that the fragment of circuit board that was supposedly from these timers was of a different type of manufacture. The metallic evidence from the fragment was contradicted the evidence of the timers that were sold to Libya. It was of a different type. 6 months before Lockerbie, the American Navy shot down an Iranian civilian airliner with 290 people on board over the Gulf. And Iran at the time swore revenge. So a more likely explanation for Lockerbie was that this was commissioned by Iran, that they commissioned terrorists to carry out a revenge attack. To me and many other people, that is a much more credible explanation of the motive for the bombing.
Coming together in one terrible reality. That is the story of the Lockerbie disaster, of how death and destruction in the sky brought death and devastation on the ground below.
But if a bomb had been planted in the front luggage hold, it would have caused an explosion which would have split the plane in 2, separating the cockpit from the main part of the fuselage, as happened in this case.
نتحدث فقط لأن الموضوع يتعلق بمواطنين ليبيين، ولكن لا علاقة للدولة الليبية بهذا الموضوع منذ البداية، وتم استخدام الأمم المتحدة استخداما قسريا في ذلك الوقت، وأصدروا قرارات حظر جائرة ضد الشعب الليبي.
قضية لوكربي تعتبر قضية عادلة، وإحنا حاجة قررها المؤتمر الشعبي العام، قرارات المؤتمر الشعبي أن ما نسلموش لأمريكا لبريطانيا، ونسلموه في دولة محايدة وبضمانات نقبلها، وإحنا دولة محايدة وعدة سيادة وعندنا قانون، وما قام امريكا وبريطانيا بيتحدوا احنا اهلا وسهلا نتحدوهم.
نطالبوا بحكم عادل ويضل في بلادنا.
القذافي في كل خطبه كان يهاجم امريكا، وبالتالي استقبل الليبيون الخبر كشيء معتاد، كتطور معتاد وفصل من فصول الصراع الذي كان بين القذافي وامريكا. بالنسبة لبريطانيا ساءت العلاقات معها أعتقد في عام 1984 في نفس الفترة، عندما كانت هناك مظاهرة للمعارضة الليبية في لندن أمام السفارة البريطانية، وتم إطلاق النار من داخل السفارة، وقتلت شرطية بهذا الرصاص الذي انطلق من داخل السفارة، وهي قضية معقدة وقضية طويلة ربما.
بعد سنوات من الجدل المحتدم، وافق محامي المتهمين الليبيين على مثولهما أمام المحكمة بشرط أن تقام على أرض حيادية هي أرض هولندا وبموجب القانون الاسكتلندي. وجرت المحاكمة الأولى في كامب زايست عام 1999، حيث وجهت إلى المجراح وفحيمة تهم التفجير وقتل 270 شخصاً.
أنا أول ما شفت بابا في المحاكمة حسيت بالحزن والأسى، لكن إن شاء الله
الحق يطلع، وإن شاء الله
إن شاء الله المحاكمة تكون عادلة، وإن شاء الله بابا يطلع بريء ويفقد مباراته. بابا
تثبت براءته
إن شاء الله.
تهمة باطلة موجهة لشقيق، والمحاكمة قوي المحاكمة كويسة، وإحنا مش عاطين شك في اسكتلندية.
Margaret Thatcher was the British Prime Minister at the time, and she had a very close relationship with the government of Ronald Reagan and his successor, George Bush. She was aware of all these sensitivities and knew that if they went after the original suspects, that could cause a lot of problems for the American government. And she, I'm pretty sure, didn't want that to happen.
It is even worse in daylight than it looked on television at night. Now you can see the full enormity of the damage and the extent of it, and the way in which there's pieces of aircraft and twisted metal scattered over a wide area, and the number of houses that are damaged.
With all the political background to this, the question of who might want to blame or otherwise Iran, the question of who might wish to say that Syria was innocent when they wanted to fight the Gulf War, the question of American perceptions of Libyan guilt of almost everything that happened in the terrorist field. It's very hard to see where the truth lies.
It would be fair to say that the Lockerbie bombing did not occur in a vacuum. It just didn't come left field out of nowhere. There had been action and reaction by the Western world against the Islamic world, whether against Libya in particular, because Colonel Gaddafi's family and his compound had been bombed, but it had been ongoing for some time. They were caught by German police in Dortmund, I think it was, in October, a few months after the USS Vincennes had downed the Iranian airliner, and a few months before the Lockerbie bombing.
The Americans also were obsessed with the issue of the hostages that were held in Lebanon, often by Iranian and Syrian proxy groups, and they didn't want to do anything that would endanger those hostages. They knew that if they attacked Iran and Syria, it was like poking a hornet's nest. They were going to get stung, whereas Libya was a much easier target.
A very difficult day, because it was a very difficult day to my client also, because he is confident, as I am very confident, of his innocence, and we are trying to find fairness, justice, but we don't find it till now. But we will continue.
تمت إدانة عبد الباسط وحكم بالسجن، وتمت تبرئة فحيمة. عندما عاد فحيمة إلى ليبيا، أتذكر ذلك المشهد، كان القذافي في استقباله وعانقه طويلا، وتحدث القذافي آنذاك وقال، كانت المحكمة تقريبا أو الحكم صدر يوم 3 أو يوم 4، المهم أتذكر أنه قال يوم الاثنين سأقدم أدلة تجعل القاضي ينتحر أو يستقيل، أو يعني أخذ رد فعل قوي محاولا امتصاص الصدمة والتأكيد على تبرئة ليبيا من هذه التهمة.
His wife, she is visiting him, and we are preparing ourselves if they give us permission to see him, to say bye-bye before he is leaving to Scotch.
You were surprised?
Yes, we are very surprised about this action, really. Because we are, I mean, we talk also with the victim family, and also they didn't accept such action.
I became advised that Abdel Basit al-Megrahi was had been diagnosed as having prostate cancer and that it was incurable. He was some time off from death at that stage, but it was notified because he was clearly a high-profile prisoner within the Scottish prison estate. Matters began to accelerate in 2009 as clearly his condition began to deteriorate. I do believe in compassion. I also believe in forgiveness. Nothing can atone for what Mr. al-Megrahi was convicted of, but he was a sick man, terminally ill. He would pose no danger to us or any other community. And on that basis, I followed the rules and guidance which he was allowed home.
الخبر مفرح جدا. الخبر ما فيش شك يعني يطلج الصدور يعني لكافة أبناء الشعب الليبي وليس الشعب الليبي فقط ولكن كل المناصرين للعدالة في العالم.
The images that we saw in Libya yesterday were outrageous and disgusting.
Worldwide, as allies with the US government and the UK government, we cannot tolerate a convicted terrorist going free on the basis of evidence that may well have been fraudulent.
هذا هو الفرح الكبير لأن عبد الباسط المقحي لما هو طبعا احنا كوجهة نظر أن إنسان هدايا بريء.
Scotland received nothing from this, but it would be fair to say that there was considerable political intrigue, all of which Scotland was oblivious to because the negotiations and machinations between the US and UK governments with Libya were ongoing. But Scotland was entirely out of the loop.
I think the appearance of Mr. al-Megrahi on our television screens is a further reminder that a great mistake was made when he was released. The Prime Minister and I, when we were in opposition, both strongly disagreed with that decision.
The United Kingdom was seeking a deal with BP, for BP rather, with Libya. The United States was equally seeking oil and gas deals as well as seeking a friend in Colonel Gaddafi against what they saw as the threat from Islamic terrorism.
They want to forget, but they can't forget because you can't erase history. It happened, and they still receive visitors in the town from you know, those people that still say some of the widows and relations still come visiting.
There's a longer lasting effect, I believe, of this case on the Scottish criminal justice system. This case is a major stain on that system because not only was the wrong person convicted, but also the prosecuting authority withheld a lot of evidence that could have resulted in the acquittal of Abdel Basset al-Megrahi. What the court heard, the evidence that the court heard, was only a fraction, really, of the full evidence gathered.
This is the Lockerbie Air Disaster Remembrance Room, or we call it the Memorial Room. And these are memorial books, and in these books you can read all about the passengers that were killed on the plane. And then there's a visitor's book in this corner, and people come from all over the world to visit this place, and they fill this book in. You can see how many people have been here all the time. This is a Christmas tree that was made by the local children's, the 3 schools around here. All the children built this Christmas tree, so we've kept it going. And on the tree, on this Christmas tree, is a star for every person that was on the plane. So we've kept it in situ for people to find, and people have found their loved ones on the star.